the Nazis after he resigned from the FBI at the end of the case. And the Hollywood moguls, the Warner studio, brought out a movie based on his exploits called Confessions of a Nazi Spy. So he was secretly anti-Jewish. And from the very beginning, he was vehemently anti-Hitler. Okay, now how he got into the FBI because of J. Edgar Hoover's talent spotting. Whatever you think about J. Edgar Hoover, he had a good eye for a clever agent, and he spotted Leon Turrou early in the 1920s. In 1924, in fact, he tried to recruit him for the FBI. He couldn't succeed to begin with because Turrou didn't have a law degree, which was expected of special agents in the FBI, and because there was a retrenchment and reduction of budgets in the FBI in the 1920s. But in the 1928 election, Turrou made himself indispensable by campaigning for Hoover, the Republican candidate, Herbert Hoover, who became president in the following year. And Hoover was able to recruit him. And he immediately proved to be a brilliant detective. And several people in the FBI made this point in his personnel file. This is the FBI's best detective. And so he was put on to some of the most taxing cases, came out of these well. When the FBI got a tip-off about the spy case early in 1938, Turrou had to find somebody to put in charge of the investigation, and he turned straight away to Leon Turrou.
So tell me about this when he turns to Leon Turrou for the special investigation. So you mentioned that he was a spy. He worked with the FBI. He was eventually dismissed with prejudice. And then he works to set up a press campaign, talking with different figures in Hollywood. And how does this eventually come to a head where he's able to root out this Nazi spy ring?
Well, he was able to root it out because I mentioned the interception of a telegram in January 1938. The plot there was to kidnap an American U.S. Army officer, Colonel Henry Elgin, either using entrapment, one of the women at the disposal of the Abwehr, or by sending a forged order from the head of the United States Army, asking Colonel Elgin to turn up at the McAlpin Hotel for a secret mission carrying the East Coast defense details of the United States. That was the content of the telegram. And of course, because of the tip-off, this never came about, and Colonel Elgin was told to ignore the approach. But a couple of weeks later, in the middle of February, a guy called Gunther Rumrich was caught out in a passport scam. The German Secret Service, the Abwehr, wanted to get a number of American passport application forms so that it could obtain fraudulent US passports for its secret agents, which it then proposed to send into Soviet Russia because there was mounting espionage against the Soviet Union. Now, Rumrich was caught out by the authorities. It turned out that his codename was Crown. This had been the codename of the person who'd engaged in the plot, the McAlpin Hotel plot, to kidnap Colonel Henry Elgin, who, by the way, would probably have been killed. And that's the reason why the British sent the tip-offs. It didn't want an American army officer to be murdered in that way. Another example, of course, of their ruthlessness. So in mid-February, Rumrich is arrested and he's turned over to Turrou. Turrou realizes that he's a member of an extensive spy ring. Rumrich sings extensively to Turrou in exchange for a promise for lenient sentencing. Turrou realizes at this point that Rumrich is a minor cog, but the leads that Rumrich gave him led him to the epicenter of the spying, and especially to Ignaz Griebel. Ignaz Griebel, though a congenital liar, talked a lot to Turrou. He refused to sign a confession, but he talked a lot, and Turrou was able to piece his investigation together. Turrou had an amazing quality of being able to inspire confidence from the people he was interrogating. I mean, I think it's a cliche that sometimes people got better results by offering a suspect a cigarette than by beating them into pulp. But Turrou had that methodology down to a fine art. He wasn't a terrible, truthful person himself. He made up all kinds of fairy stories about his own past and about his father, a person who probably never met. And because he was so mendacious himself, perhaps that gave him a slight edge when it came to spotting mendacity into the people at the other side of the table when he was interrogating them.
Interesting. He understood the good cop, bad cop routine before that was a standard trope of interrogation, and suspects could see through it and then clam up.
Hey everyone, Scott here. One more brief word from our sponsors.
Is this, through his interrogation of Ignaz Griebel, is this what eventually leads to the downfall of the spy ring?
Yeah, I think Ignaz Griebel was his main informant. It was Griebel who let him know that there was a spy organization based in Berlin that was run also from Bremen. He gave him a number of spies, for example, a guy called Voss. And they gave him the names of a number of spies, and Romlich was able to, and Turrou was able to proceed from there, arresting the people who were nominated, interrogating them, getting more names, and widening the investigation in that way. He was, however, hampered by the fact that probably someone in the NYPD, leaked the details of the initial arrests. So they were all over the New York press, and of course in Germany, they found out because of that, and the orders went out to German spies in America to return to Germany as soon as possible, and not to board any ships which put in at American ports. So quite a number of the people in the spy ring managed to escape to Germany, and only 4 people were put on trial at the end.
And speaking of the trial, this was a national sensation, and it played a significant role in shifting public opinion against Germany. Can you tell me about the trial and how exactly it shifted public opinion in the United States?
Well, I think the trial shocked American opinion because of the spectacle of a foreign power interfering on American soil. I think that's extremely important because at the same time there were atrocities taking place abroad. For example, Kristallnacht, the purging of the Jewish properties in Germany, took place simultaneously with the Nazi spy trial in New York. But because it's an event at home and affected Americans, it had a greater impact. But at the same time as having an impact because people were shocked, the trial made itself known. It was highly publicized because of its entertainment value. And one of those, a prominent feature there, was the story of the attempt to establish a so-called salon in Washington, D.C. One might otherwise describe it as a brothel, where American army officers and naval officers and politicians were to be supplied with beautiful young women and wine and good food and so on, with the objective of compromising them so that they could be blackmailed into revealing to Germany not only military secrets, but the planning objectives of the White House as well. So this was an entertaining story that came out in the trial, and it turned out that Griebel, we mentioned him before, had he was a married man. He'd married the nurse who nursed him in Austria after he was wounded in the First World War, but he was an inveterate womanizer. And his mistress, as of 1937-38, was a woman called Kate Moog. Now, Kate Moog had managed to convince everybody that she had nursed Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1920s when he was sick with polio. That is, before he became president of the United States. And she said that when she was his nurse, she had made the acquaintance of all kinds of members of the American political establishment, including many of those appointed to high office by Roosevelt once he entered the White House. So Griebel decided to take his girlfriend, Kate Mook, to Germany, where they met Eric Pfeiffer, and then proceeded to Berlin, where they stayed in an expensive hotel, and went to meet Admiral Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, to explain the plan they had for setting up the brothel in New York. Now, this is a very entertaining story. They began to compare Kate Mook with Mata Hari, the famous German spy who was shot by the French in 1917.
So you mentioned how it shifted public opinion against Germany and in many ways could have primed the pump for America to quickly support the war effort after the Pearl Harbor bombing. Before we discuss the long-term implications and the importance of this story, I have a hypothetical question for you. Let's say that the spy ring had not been broken up and it had continued to steal military intelligence and designs for aircraft and, who knows, possibly even entered the Manhattan Project. How much of an impact do you think the spy ring could have had if it had not broken up? Do you think it would have stolen significant intelligence, or would its intelligence always have been marginal and not really affected the outcome of the war all that much?
Well, it did obtain significant intelligence. I mean, its failure was that its agents were detected and then exposed. The spy ring, although broken up in 1938, continued and then expanded later. And getting the details of the atomic bombing developed, the Manhattan Project, was one of its top priorities. If that had happened, if they had got hold of the bomb before America got hold of the bomb, then conceivably this might have changed the course of the war. Although I'm not one of those who goes in for fancy theories about intelligence being the key element in a war. For example, it's claimed that British intelligence shortened World War II by 3 years. That's a serious claim, which I think is preposterous, frankly. And I think we have to remember that America came out on top in the war because of the GIs.
Right. That's in big bold letters, the recent film about Alan Turing. At the end credits, it says, "Due to the work of Ultra, the war was shortened by 2 years. It is stated as unequivocal fact." So, yes, I agree.
Oh, it's come down to 2 years. It's come down to 2 years.
Right. Yeah, that is a very bold claim. And of course, the codebreaker was significant, but there are other factors at war too.
Yeah, it must be remembered that Germany had broken our code as well.
Right, but that didn't change the fact that
It's a two-way process. You know, the Germans are sitting stupidly at home doing nothing.
Right. Just being aware that there are 500,000 aircraft coming toward you when you had not been aware of it beforehand doesn't change the fact that there are hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of aircraft coming toward you. Yeah, so that's a separate discussion. But well, thank you for this overview. I'd like to wrap up this discussion by your interpretation of what is the long-term significance of this story and understanding Nazi espionage in the United States. Why do you think this story is worth knowing today, and what are the long-term implications of it?
I think that I would like to see Leon Turrou restored to his rightful place as an American hero. You mentioned earlier that he was dismissed with prejudice from the FBI. This was because Hoover took exception to his going public with his story. He sold his story to the New York Post. I mean, I have some sympathy with Hoover here, but Turrou was blacklisted by Hoover for federal employment. And in the end, he emigrated to France just after the end of the war, where he became J. Paul Getty's security guy. And these two factors, blacklisted by Hoover and his emigration to France, I think have removed from the sight of historians someone who was actually an American hero. Secondly, I think perhaps we have an object lesson in the story of the